This
The
is called the
doozy.
doozy.
Okay. The big dude, yeah. All right, awesome. Okay, so one second, I bet I'm organize cams and stuff, get out of the way. All right. So we're going to be talking about annual processing right now to end the day. And the purpose of this session was, well, we had a few reasons. First of all, we weren't sure how the COVID discussion was going to go, and we wanted to give all of that conversation some context and kind of review all the phases of annual that have to be gone through every year in order to figure out how best to deal with the pandemic situation. It sounds like we have a relatively good hold on that, so we'll still be going through that, and I will call out places where, you know, we might be looking especially hard at as a result of the pandemic, and then of course we'll just refresh everybody's memory on what annual processing is all about.
It is a fairly common question, and you know, just we only do it once a year, right? So people forget what one is, what is two. You know, I mean, we get the questions kind of every year from maybe various states and places. So I think it's a good review for everybody.
I absolutely agree, and it's something we touch on every users group to kind of keep it fresh in everybody's mind. But yeah, it's good to go through it anyway, and especially this year as we're trying to figure everything out. So before you get to annual, of course, there are a few prerequisites, one of which is going through daily processing and submitting all your continuous counter data, submitting all of your short-term count data, and your manual, you know, turning limit data as well. QA/QCing it, making sure your preliminary ADTs are looking good. Some people, like Minnesota, and maybe one or two others, I'm not sure, use the ADT decision environment to immediately evaluate their daily short-term data and come up with a site ADT. But the point is, throughout the year, you're supposed to be keeping up with running your data and dealing with your QC and generating preliminary ADTs, preliminary being kind of the key word for 2020. I think we decided in our earlier session that those preliminary ADTs are almost always going to be overwritten by, you know, downstream official ADTs. In addition to running your daily, you've got to run monthly. Monthly mainly deals with continuous count data, at least for all non-Iowa people. Monthly phase 1, which is the phase most people run, goes through and creates summary statistics for all your continuous counters at a monthly level. So your MADTs, your MAWDTs, MADWETs, all the MA blah, 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 acronyms out there, or initialisms out there, are done during annual phase 1. And that allows you to review your continuous counters throughout the year, making sure they're still on track. We have some cool monthly reports that show how this month compares to the same month last year and all down the road. So this monthly summarization gives you those summary statistics, but also gives you kind of a milepost to allow you to evaluate your continuous count program and make sure everything's looking good. For Iowa, and for anybody else that's interested in doing this, during monthly, you can also run the factor calculation as a monthly process instead of an annual process for all factor types other than growth. So we talked about this a little bit earlier today. So Iowa what are we in September? So Iowa right now will have computed August's factors. So the August daily factors, the August seasonal factors, the official factors for 2010 were just computed. And then they can go and run phase 3, which recomputes their short-term count ADTs from August using those factors they just created. So there's a monthly paradigm of running factors, and then there's an annual paradigm. Right now, Iowa's the only monthly paradigm, but they're doing this 12 times a year, which allows them to essentially be done with their short-term count processing as of January, as soon as they do the monthly process in January, and then just focus on, the other parts of annual, which is pretty cool. They don't have to worry too much about factor calculation, reviewing all the factors, with the exception of growth. So this all has to happen before annual starts. And like always, jump in with questions if you got them. And then we get up to the 6, and I'm using air quotes, the 6 phases of annual. They're actually, if you count them, there's 8, but the last phase is phase 6, but we'll ignore that small problem. I think, yeah, we'll ignore that small problem. So the first thing you're going to do at the end of the year, of course, after you've run monthly for December, is to go ahead and run annual phase 1. And annual phase 1 will do basically what monthly phase 1 does at a monthly level, but at an annual level. So all of your ADTs, all of your AWETs, highest hour stats, your HPMS statistics like Ks and Ds for continuous counters are all created here too. After which you've got a whole set of reports that allow you to view your continuous statistics, at which point, the operators have choices to make. If data looks funky, maybe they want to go in and purge some data or mark some data with a no ADT note if there is a construction event or something like that. The idea being that after phase 1, you QC all of your continuous data, and then your continuous data is done. Point. All right. And Catherine, by the way, we're going to go over just sort of the big picture first, each of the phases, and then we're going to delve in and actually look at the interfaces as a second pass.
Joe, are you sharing more on your screen than just the initial title page?
Yes, I'm sorry. I had my thing paused. I'm glad you said something, or I would have sat here happily going through. Yeah, see these nice slides? Look at how beautiful. You missed it. Without Laura's help, you would have never seen those slides. Thank you, Laura. Okay. So after phase 1, you're done with continuous. Phase 2 is where you go and compute your factors if you're not Iowa. Now, keep in mind, Iowa's already done this for most of the hard factor groups prior to this phase. So everybody else, after computing their factors computing their continuous statistics using annual phase 1, now go in and create factors based on the statistics that they just created in phase 1. So this is going to go through at the end of 2020. You're going to go through, and assuming the world still exists and hasn't exploded, create factors. And you create these factor types. So you're going to create daily factors, which record the variation of day of week variation by month. So there's 84 daily factors, 1 per day of week per month. So 12 times 7 per factor group. And seasonal factor, which basically represents the monthly variation throughout the year per factor group. So there's 12 seasonal factors per group. Axle factors, which are used to take your single tube axle counts and create vehicle estimates from those. There's 12 axle factors per month, so that's also seasonal. Growth factors, which is the thing that has to be done at the annual level. You can't do growth factors at a monthly level. Growth factors give you an estimate of how traffic has grown from year to year, and that's used. We'll be talking about growth factors here shortly during phase 4. Hourly factors are used in several places. One of them is as an input to the MEPDG for the WIM people out there. Another is for, we talked about turning movements yesterday, creating preliminary ADT estimates for counts that aren't quite 24 hours. We would use hourly factors to do that. And then, of course, the biggies, Stephen was just talking about these this morning, the ability to adjust your short-term class counts using daily and seasonal class. And I want to make sure that I'm clear here. You use, I can't seem to see my mouse anymore. Where's my mouse? There it is. Okay, so these two daily and seasonal factors are used to adjust volume counts up to an ADT. So if you take a short-term volume count, in April, for example, April might be slightly lower than the annual average volume for the year, and so you want to bump that estimate up a little bit using the seasonal factor to get it up to an annual average. You're doing that on the volume data. This daily seasonal class factors are the same thing, but are applied to class data. So it's the idea that, you know, if you're to look at a graph and you're to graph out the various, you know, classification types, if you were to look at total volume, your graph might go like, you know, this or something, you know, it kind of has a little hump as the summer months go by. If you look at your motorcycle traffic, it goes like this, right? Because motorcycles are mostly during warm weathers. You know, if you do your class 9s, it's going to be looking kind of like flat, right? And so every class has a different seasonal distribution and a seasonal variation that you're trying to capture. And so it's super important you adjust your class data using these daily and seasonal class factors. And again, I'm just mirroring what Stephen was talking about earlier. And conversion factors, I'm not sure that many people use, but when you take a short-term count, we use factors to create an AADT. Some people are interested in what an AAWDT, in other words, an annual average weekday traffic, and an AAWET, weekend traffic would be. And you can use conversion factors to do that. So you can take your ADT and say, well, this is what the AAWDT would be, and this is what the AAWET would be. Is that enough initials for you?
I'm not sure we do them. Jeff could correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought we didn't implement conversion because nobody was using it.
We were for a while, but who knows?
Okay.
If that's a thing, that you guys are interested in, we'll talk to us. Any questions on phase 2? So at the end of phase 2, you've created all your factors and you're ready to jump into phase 3, which is an optional phase. You don't have to do this, but it sounds like for 2020, everybody probably should. So after you've just created your factors in phase 2, what you can do is recompute your short-term count AADTs using the factors you just created, right? Because when you ran your data throughout the year, it was estimating AADTs using prior year factors, which generally is not necessarily a bad idea, but this year, as we discussed earlier, is probably a bad idea. You want to estimate AADTs using current year data. So after phase 2, you'll almost certainly want to run phase 3 for this, for the 2020 traffic year. And that'll go through and recalculate all those count AADTs using the current year data. Okay. And after that, you've got all your short-term counts dealt with. So you dealt with all your continuous counts in phase 1. You dealt with all your short-term counts now in phase 3. Now it's time to look at phase 4, which is the site statistic creation. So the difference between a count ADT and a site ADT, every time you run a short-term count throughout the year, you're generating a count ADT. So you've got actual traffic count data out there. You take that data and you match it with the correct factors, and out the other side comes an ADT representing the annual average daily traffic for that short-term count. It's an annualized version of that short-term count. Oh, yelling outside my door. And site ADTs are the official ADT for that site. So, and that site ADT may consist of just the count ADT. So if that site was counted in the current year once, we'll just copy that count ADT and make that the official site ADT for that site. Sometimes you might have more than one count at the same site, in which case maybe the appropriate thing to do would be to average those counts together to come up with the official site ADT. In that case, the site ADT might not match either count ADT. So again, kind of exemplifying what we're talking about here. It's the official ADT associated with that site that's going to then go on to HPMS and onto your, LRS and whoever else is interested in ADTs. Also during phase 4, you can compute site ADTs using growth factors. So again, for 2020, you'll want to create growth factors using a single years of data. So it'll compare 2019 ADTs to 2020 ADTs at all your continuous sites, and probably come up with a negative growth factor. And phase 4 will apply that negative growth factor to uncounted sites. Or degrowth, which is a term I've never heard before that I saw twice on Stephen's slides today. Degrowth. I'm not sure I approve, Stephen. Any questions?
No, I didn't use the term degrowth. I said that we do change rates, is what I suggested. Somebody else uses the term degrowth.
Wait, what did you say about the term degrowth?
I don't use the term degrowth.
Okay.
It's change rate.
Okay, fair enough. I did see degrowth though, I swear, at some point today.
Yeah, I saw it too, and yeah.
Maybe another chat.
We have power. We can make up whatever words we want to. Who's going to stop us? All right. So that's phase 4, site statistics. So after phase 4, it actually depends. Some states after phase 4, every count location will have an official ADT, whether that ADT has been derived from counts, whether it's been derived from growth factoring forward prior ADTs. And another mechanism I didn't talk about here is you could just plug in an ADT. So if there's a brand new road, none of the sites have an ADT, but you have a reasonable estimate for what those ADTs might be, you could go through and actually plug those in the phase 4 interface, which Kathy is going to show here in a bit. So after phase, and so that's one way of doing it, is every site has a site ADT. Not everybody does that. Some states just will have a site ADTs for sites that have been counted in the current year. So that's a user preference thing. Okay, and I'll be showing you this later. The local roads user interface, which I think I showed briefly last year, but not very long, was originally written for Kansas to deal with places like, and requests like Meyer, for example, where every paved road has to have an ADT. How to come up with a number based on some documented process. So we have this local roads UI that is for creating a number. It's probably not a great number, but it's still a number that you can say, well, this city out in the middle of nowhere with 200 people, you know, we need to know the ADT for that paved road there. Well, the average is, you know, 25. Okay, so I'll be showing you that here in a second. And that's done, that was inserted between annual phase 4, the site ADT, and annual phase 5, which is HPMS, in order to go and get, again, sort of estimates of ADTs for, you know, roads where there's no counts, basically. Okay. There's potentially a new phase now, which probably no one has heard of unless you've been in our roads and highways meetings, which is kind of an annual phase in between the local roads now and HPMS, which is the network freeze. So the way roads and highways integration is going to work is throughout the year, we're going to be sucking site information from roads and highways into Jackalope, and we'll be doing that continuously throughout the year. At the end of a traffic year, you will continue to make site changes to your network over the year, but come June, that HPMS report is supposed to reflect the network as of before the first of the year, right? I hope I'm making sense. So out here in April, you know, someone's making changes to the number of lanes or the functional class of your sections. That's great for the next year, but you don't want that change influencing your HPMS submittal for the prior year. I hope that's making sense. So what we're going to do, and this has not been implemented yet, but we're going to create a phase where you can, let's say in April, press a button and say, I want to freeze the network as of December 31st of the prior year. And what's going to happen is Jackalope is going to go out to roads and highways and essentially create site splits that all end at the end of the year. And so, if someone came over here and changed the functional class in April, you don't want that functional class changed representing your HPMS thing. You press this button, it'll create a site split with the old functional class for the prior year, and then the new functional class will be used in the upcoming year. I hope I'm making sense. And this probably is only applicable for roads and highways people, but did that make any sense whatsoever?
So XOR users wouldn't have that same phase of annual.
XOR users probably wouldn't, because roads and highways has a feature that I don't remember what it's called. Timeline? What's it called? Time machine. I don't know what it's called. Basically,
Temporality.
what's it called?
Temporality.
Temporality. Okay. So basically, you can roll back the network and say, I want to see what the network looks like as of this date. And which gives us the ability to basically roll back the network and say, I want to see what the network looked like on December 31st, 2019. And that allows us to create these site splits. I'm not sure that XOR has that functionality.
Okay.
Melissa or somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, but if so, I have never heard of that.
It does not.
Okay. So that would be the problem is, we just wouldn't know what the network looked like on December 31st. So we probably couldn't do it for XOR. We probably couldn't do it for Agile Assets. And, the rest of our RDIs are with state-specific LRSs. So it's probably going to be a roads and highways exclusive feature, would be my guess. Okay. Someone
said that Tinge's slide had the degrowth on it. So you guys did see it, but Stephen's saying he prefers, change rate.
Prefers change rate. Fair enough. Tinge is the boss. He can make up whatever words he wants. So I'm gonna get in between his words and reality. Okay, so that's 4.7, probably just for roads and highways people. Stephen says that's right. Whatever the boss wants. Okay. Annual phase 5 we went over today. So after all of these processes, now we have official ADTs at all of our sites. We've gone through and frozen our network for our roads and highways people so that we have a solid, unmoving, stable target on which to place our HPMS statistics. And then we go and run HPMS, which I showed you this morning, which is the creation of all those HPMS statistics, the Ks and Ds, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time after that, but at the end of that, in theory, all of your sites have HPMS statistics, and if you're running in traffic section mode, your traffic sections also do. Finally, last but not least is phase 6, which is implemented in a few places. I'm not going to guess at how many have this, but now that you've gotten all of your data correct inside of Jackalope, let's let the rest of the world see this. And so this is the remote database interface publish phase. So pushing those statistics onto an LRS somewhere where they can be consumed by whomever needs them is what this is. And we have Highways by XOR, publish, which pushes it off onto that network. We have an Agile Assets one, we have state-specific ones, and we're building the Roads and Highways one now. All right. Any questions on what I'm talking about before we actually start looking at these things? Kathy, do you want me to, how do you want to do this? Do you want to have control while you're doing yours and I'll have control while I'm doing mine?
Sure, yeah, okay, yes, I'll take control this time now. Okay, so I'm going to talk about phase 1. Joe already covered the general idea of what phase 1 is. I have a Wisconsin development database up that I'll be using for some of my demos. And then when we look at phase 2 for the monthly paradigm, we'll look at an Iowa test database for that. So here I opened, you know, data operations annual phase 1 for 2017. And the first thing that someone would want to do before processing their annual statistics is go and look and see what they have their settings set for the statistic creation. So down at the bottom is settings, and then we're into the statistic creation, and we're looking for this row here for the number of, we're calling it NAN days for an AADW, but how many months of a AADW have to be present for a site in order to generate an AADW? Am I saying that right? How many MADWs have to be present to calculate an AADW is really what this is. And actually this is set very low, maybe just because this is the test database. I think in general I see 8s, and there are even some places, maybe Missouri, where I thought I saw 12, like where you required every single month to be present for a site to calculate an AADT. I could be quoting the wrong state. So it does vary, but I think 8 might be the typical number. Then you resubmit or resubmit all. It'll go out and generate the statistics for your sites. What you're looking on the screen when it's done is, we're just listing these sites numerically. So good data. This means we were able to calculate an AADT for all of the data types that were collected at this site. So the AADT is this number, and we were able to calculate the statistic also for length, speed, and volume. This is the volume, AADT here. So on the right-hand side, I have a list of what data types were able to calculate statistics. There could be a case here, I don't know if you can see, my color looks wonky, but this site has a filter error, you'll see. It's got a red error on it, but it has an AADT next to it. So that would indicate that the filter error must be referencing a data type that is not the volume, because we did calculate the volume. We have statistics for class length, speed, and volume for that site. So when I hover here, I see that it's the WIM that we had the filter error message for. So that means that this site didn't have 4 months of the necessary data, and it might not have even been set to 4 when this was originally run. So therefore it generated this filter error. Here is one that has no AADT next to it, and if I hover, it's telling me volume, length, and speed were all missing enough data to generate this annual statistic. There are times when I've seen maybe you have very little class representation in maybe a factor group, and maybe you really need to have some sort of statistics created for the site so that you can use the class data that had been there for whatever months or times during the year were there. So you can also process this as a whole, go into your settings, reduce your restrictions and say, like maybe in this case, you will allow 4 months, but normally you would want 5 months. Save this new setting and resubmit that site only. You could go down and do your resubmit. And now that you've reduced your restrictions, you theoretically, you know how many months you needed to set that for, can now create your statistics for this site so that you can then, going on to next phase 2, maybe that site can contribute to some of the axle factors or the class factor calculations. And I say that just because I know I won't. Anyway, in some states, when you're missing some representation, that's a way to try to get at least some representation for some of the months, for some of the data that you need to get. Any questions or anything I didn't cover on the use of our settings and phase 1? I don't see it up on this. Maybe we didn't have a prior year in here for this to show, but this screen will also at a glance show you the % change from the last year's AADT to this year. It can call to your attention some site that might have, you know, a very strange AADT. You can go and use all the various reports that we have available to you and try to maybe find the month that may look strange. Go into that month and you determine 3 weeks of that month are good and 1 week was bad and you need to go purge it. So then you purge that week that's bad, you rerun that monthly summary for that site so that the monthly underlying statistics get changed, and then you can come back to phase 1 and resubmit that site only, and you should then have your AADT calculated based on only those 3 weeks that were good, and it's now not looking at the 1 week that you had purged. So if you find multiple months with bad data that you end up purging, you know, you need to rerun your monthly for that site for all of those months before you rerun phase 1 to calculate your new AADT. All right, I don't see any questions in the chat, so we can talk about phase 2. The report I was waiting for came up. Just 1 second. Okay. In my other window, I have Iowa. Sorry, I have a comment there I'll read. So Tony from Idaho asked, in the case of where I think I'm saying you would have purged a week and then you reprocessed monthly, you do have the ability, it is a setting that you can have in your monthly, I don't have that screen up now, that you can change the requirements for monthly. But theoretically, in the case that I just made, you had 3 weeks of good data and 1 week that looked bad. You would be able to reprocess your monthly without having to change your setting. But if you had this set that you needed at least 3 days of each day of the week, that would be your N days MADW, and that site would fail once you did that purge, yes, you would need to change the setting before you reran monthly, run monthly for that site, and go back and change your setting back to your standard requirements. Does that answer your question?
And arguably, from a factor standpoint, it would be better to, I mean, if you had if it wasn't already at 1, you know, to change the number of days per month to 1 as opposed to reduce the number of months. I mean, it's probably better to have, you know, 12 months of 1 week's worth of data as opposed to 8 months of 2 weeks in terms of, you know, creating factors and stuff like that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so typically you want to run it with your highest standards and then find out maybe what sites fall out from these filters, and then you can try to whittle it down and find ways to get it in there, if that's what you're saying, Joe.
Yeah, I mean, if you had to shave off one dimension, it'd be better to shave off on the num days per month instead of the other one. I was just giving preference to that.
Right.
Then they'd make a choice.
Gotcha. That makes perfect sense. Thanks.
So this is what phase 2 looks like using the monthly paradigm. And that gets set in your annual phase 2 options. they're set to the factor methodology being monthly, where the rest of us are set for annual. And by changing it to that, then we'll come back and look at some of the other options in just a moment. By changing it to the monthly, your representation here of this phase 2 is a month and a year. Here in the Wisconsin site, phase 2 is set to annual, and you'll see this is a representation of the entire year, 2017. So looking at the, this is hourly, so we had talked about Iowa being probably one of the only states that I know of that are calculating the hourly factors right now. All of the different factors can be viewed by selecting them from your drop-down. Right now, this is the group we're looking at, the factor group Muni Interstate, Sunday, hour 1. And we are looking at July 2018, and so here is the factor for that day, that hour for this month. Then you can see what the factor was historically for that hour, for that day, for that month. And then again, this is a test database, but you would then be able to see if they were running this on that rolling factor method, you'd see all of the rest of the months. Now, so what happened here was Brian did testing in this database before we rolled out to his production environment. And so, you know, he hadn't run the forward months of that year yet, you know, going August through December, if that makes sense. So again, in the options then, you see these are the different ways to calculate factors. So in Iowa, they have to have at least 3 years data to calculate a factor. So if a site doesn't have 3 years of data, then it will not contribute to this group, we're talking continuous, to this group to calculate the given factor that you're working on. And how many years back is the system supposed to look for to find those 3 years? So in this case, it has to be the sequential last 3 years. If this were upped, let's just say it went back 5 years. If this site fell out 2 years ago, but it had a factor from prior, then it could still look back more than 3 years to find that 3rd year to calculate the factor. Does that make sense? As I'm saying it, it sounds kind of strange.
Makes sense to me.
Okay. And then here is the option where you set how far back the system should look while looking for a factor to apply to a short-term count. So if there isn't a current year factor, how far back should it look to find a factor to apply to a site in that group? And that, in this case, would be 5 years. But as you can see, in this case for hourly, you wouldn't have to ever go back that many years to find the factor because there are a good representation. So we'll look at a seasonal class. I might have, actually, I might not be connected anymore. Let me go back. Yeah. So we'll look at what a seasonal class factor looks like. I wanted to demonstrate that quickly because I was kind of trying to convince people to use Jackalope to do your seasonal class calculations. All right, and so we're now looking at seasonal class for the July 2018. And here is the representation of the bin ones. So bin 1 likely being the motorcycles. Here is your July factor. So any class short-term counts taken will have this factor applied to the bin 1 data for that count. And bin 2, actually bin 1 is probably all passengers. I didn't look at what the scheme was representing. So I think actually we used rural secondary for a lot of these calculations. But so then in this case for Iowa, they are calculating the class factors for, it looks like, and I don't know if we've got Brian in the room. Yeah, I don't see him now, but so it looks like to me it's passenger, single unit, and combo factors. Down below are a representation of all of the sites that are in group rural secondary. So before you run the calculations, you go to the managed sites and you tell the system what you want to see in the calculations. Add all of the continuous sites with data for this month. You can do it for all groups and it'll just go out and all of your groups will become populated with all of the current continuous sites. Or if you want to work on it group by group because it's easier to manage or keep track of, then, oh, Brian was in there and he said that was correct. You can just do it for this group only. Eventually, we're talking about, this had come up with Minnesota, I believe, to be able to use short-term sites in some of the data type factor calculations. The button is here, but it does not pull, or it does not calculate any of these factors using short-term data at this time.
And I think it's just axle factor type would be the only type that could be done for.
So yeah, we'd have to fix our dialogue. It's there, but yeah, we need to remove this. It's not a true option. And yes, for axle only. So you say manage sites, you have it populate, you see all of these are all of the continuous sites that belong to group rural secondary. All of these sites may not necessarily have class though. The system goes out, pulls in continuous sites with data, and they are populated into the grid. Once we go out and do the calculations and generate the factors, we actually see which sites it is that are contributing to the group factor that's calculated above. So this site contributed this factor, so on and so forth, and then the group average is displayed up above. And then again, that's by bin. For the annual method, it would look like this. So here's your year, here's your group. This is Wisconsin's groups, they're number based. This is daily, so we're looking at the Sunday factor for each month of the year of 2017. And down below are each of the sites that contributed their data to calculate those factors. If you find an outlier down here that just isn't a site that you want to use for these calculations, if you highlight that site, you can remove it from the calculations. That doesn't remove it from the group permanently. That removes it from this group calculations for this year. And when you are done, maybe you have a hole in a group with no data in a month. I don't know, let's say Thursday, maybe a lesser known group. I don't see that. If you double click on the cell that we're missing, or a cell that you want to plug in your own factor because you've calculated something slightly different and want to put something in. If you double click on the cell, we will allow you to plug a new value and enter the reason for the plug. Reason, there was no value. Reason, you know, whatever, I think this is better. Type in your new value. we'll go 069, right? That's almost 1.007. Oops.
Catherine, Stephen's asking, it uses sites with missing months. Is he misreading the screen?
Okay, let me look. I'm going to save this just so we can see what a plug value looks like, and it looks very obvious. We highlight it in blue. It uses sites with missing months. Am I missing something? Yes. So yes, this site, I think, might be an example of what you're saying. Doesn't contribute to June because that site didn't calculate a daily June value, but it did have a May value. So it uses this site to calculate May's group factor. Is that the question?
Yeah, I think so basically, Stephen, it'll compute a factor for any month that passes that filter that Catherine was talking about earlier. So yeah, if that filter is set in such a way that you don't need all 12 months in order to calculate an ADT, then yes, it's possible that this will be the case where you'll be generating for factors for the data that you do have, then the ones that aren't there, aren't there.
Right. So the same filter setting is used for the factor calculations. So when we go out and calculate the factors, if this site didn't have enough to calculate an AADT, then this site also wouldn't be used to calculate these factors. I think I just said the same thing you did, Joe.
Yep, I think so.
Okay. We have lots of reports in the report engine where you can report on all of these factors. Most of the reports will give you the group factor plus each site that was in the group and it's contributing. So we'll have a general factor report, or we can have that exact same factor report that also provides each site's factor and contributing data. So as far as I know, Cindy can correct me if I'm wrong, we have a factor report for every one of these that we calculate. I think I covered phase 2. Does anyone have any questions or anything that I might have missed that you think we should cover? Oh, I know one thing. So let's say the case where we had talked about the site was maybe a site didn't get counted this year in all year. Your HR didn't get submitted. And you run phase 1 and you have all of your sites, and you run phase 2 and it's discovered later that you have data for this site that you need to get in. You run your site's data, you run the monthly for that site through each of the months, and then you can rerun, or you want to add that site to phase 1. In phase 1, you can do a refresh from site, and this screen will go out and look, are there any sites that were missed when it ran the first time that have data now? That site will appear on the screen. It'll be, I think, gray, and it will say unsubmitted. So you have your site unsubmitted, and of course, no data associated with it. You can checkbox that or those sites and do resubmit, and now you'll have an AADT. Subsequently, then you've got the, you would want it to be included in your factor calculations. You can also add sites manually, or in addition to that scenario there, you also might have a site that could be used in a group and you want to manually add it, but it doesn't necessarily reside in the group every year or all the time. When you plug in a new value, does the rest of the values adjust to have the rest of the values in the year? Joe, maybe you can read that and interpret.
Yeah, I think he's asking, so if you have a situation where you don't have any factors, he's asking if you plug in a factor, is it going to automatically adjust the other values in the year to keep the overall average equal to what it was prior to the plug? And the answer is no. We don't do that.
Thank you for interpreting.
And so, Joe, can I ask a hard question? Then
Mhm.
how, I mean, you know, it was a very minor adjustment that Catherine just did, so it was no big deal. But if a person took like the one that's in blue there now, 1.05, and made it 1.0, right? Couldn't you be over or under inflating values for a given month and overall for the year if you don't readjust all the rest?
Yeah, I mean, I see what you're saying, because you're saying on average, I mean, it's not really true, but they're supposed to almost average one, right?
Yeah, they're supposed to come out to 1, yeah.
Well, they don't come out, the inverse of each of them, the average of the inverses would come out to 1. Yeah, that's true. We don't do that. We don't automatically dynamically change all the rest.
I think the average of the inverses would come out to 1 at the site level, not at the group level.
Yeah, that's actually a good point. So yeah, Jeff just threw in a different complication, which is at a site level, what I said was true. The average of the inverses would average to 1. But at the group level, not necessarily, because there are holes in the data. That's something, if people want that. I don't know how people generally use the plugging. I don't know if they plug a whole year, or whether they are just plugging a single month. I don't know how they use it. If they're plugging a whole year, that'd be kind of irritating. You plug in January, then you go to February, and then February just change January to something, and then you go back to January and change January, and it'll change February to, it'd get a little old.
Well, like in this case, if you're missing the 1.005 value and you want to plug it in based upon the historical series, that would make sense. And that's, I think, why it was created, right?
Yeah, the ability to plug in something from some other source. You have some other source of information, so you use that.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think in general, maybe always, new value is put in. I've seen it be done multiple ways. Sometimes if there isn't enough data to generate a factor, then people just leave it alone and then use the how many years to go back, and then we use the factors from the prior year until they get new data for the next year. Depending on which factor type is, depending on whether I plug the whole year or just a single value. I see each factor slightly different.
Yeah. That makes sense.
Just another mention, I didn't talk about this, but when your jobs for annual are running, we now have under the data management, the jobs submitted screen. It will show, okay, like here in this case, annual summarization job was created on that date and how many sites. So in this case, someone just ran annual on 2 sites. Could have been one of those situations where we did the resubmit. Here, growth factors were created and 294 jobs are now finished. So while you've hit your submit button and you're waiting for the factors to be calculated, you don't always know how long the system's going to take. This screen will give you the number of new tasks that were created, and then it will count them down until it's finished, and then when it's down to 0, it's complete. I think people are getting familiar with this. It's the same in monthly, so monthly and annual 1, 2, 3, 4. Everything will show you as the server is working on your jobs. Okay, any other phase 2 factor calculation questions?
Catherine, real quick, this is Manny.
Hi, Manny.
Last year we had the trouble where it was freezing and we had to do like 1,000 at a time. Was that like a Missouri issue, or is that something we have to look again this year or next year to see if it happens again?
I think you're talking about phase 3.
Was
And
it
that's
phase 3?
been fixed. Yeah, we even ran phase 3 on your server since that fix. But yeah, that's you're right. It was only doing them in 1,000 site jobs.
Okay,
Yeah,
I guess
that
we'll
wouldn't
take
be
a look at it.
continuous because you don't have over 1,000 continuous. So I'm thinking you're referring to phase 3.
Yeah, phase 3, because it was putting everything on short counts because we have roughly about 5,000 of those.
Yep.
Okay, well, I guess we'll check it when January comes along.
Yeah, I don't know if you remember, but we reran phase 3 there later on, and anyway, it ran. It's done.
Yeah, that's a good
Yep.
thing. So, okay, thank you.
Sure. Any other phase 2 questions? Okay, so phase 3, and this came up, a quick comment earlier today, I think when we were demoing something else from Christy on manual entry. Some states don't want phase 3 to be run on manual entry counts. They want phase 3 to run on files submitted, but not necessarily on your manual entry counts. So we now have, in the next version that you will be getting, in the version 6 that goes out, a new setting that says to enable phase 3 MEC, yes or no. So for Minnesota, they don't want phase 3 to calculate AADTs for their MEC counts. And so in Minnesota, this would be false. In Kansas, they do want it to be recalculated with the newest. So there's a set to true. So just a heads up that there will be in the next version setting where you can determine if you want that factor application applied. Again, when I make the release notes, I'm going to call out changes like this where settings need to be made, and you can make your appropriate settings based on what your states are doing. So phase 3 is a very simple screen. You can run it based on the few criteria, very specific date range, which probably in Iowa they set from the 1st of August to the 31st of August, and then they run it for August when they're all finished with all of their August data. The rest of the states might be doing by year. So at the end of 2019, when all of their factors are calculated, then they run it by year. Or you can even just go do it very specifically by a specific site, by a specific site group, and you hit recompute. What it's going to do is pull all of those sites that meet this criteria into a job. Oh, well, and you'll see in your job submitted screen a number that is your phase 3, however many it may fall into that. It tries to tell you when it's done. It usually gives you a blue message that says recompute successful. Then you would want to go to this screen and verify that all of the jobs are set to complete before maybe you go and run your, I don't know what people use to check them. I use the annual short-term summary report. It lists all of your short-term counts for the year and what factors were applied during the year. So that's phase 3. Again, I think now all of the states are doing, or clients are using phase 3 after phase 2 calculations are done. And then I think we're agreeing that it should definitely be done for the 2020 year, since your 2019 factors wouldn't have produced the same AADTs as what you're going to really have at the end of 2020 factoring. Any questions on 3? Just a mention also, so phase 3 does also go back and reapply all factors. Anything that gets applied while a count is running, phase 3 does the same thing when it is run. So class factoring, you know, daily, seasonal, all of those things. Phase 4, there are a few new things. Did I have a phase 4 open? Yeah. There are a few new things in phase 4, but we'll just talk about it in general, and then I'll point out the new things at the end. When you first open phase 4, it will bring up all sites in your site list that are current unexpired sites. So you open the screen, it's blank. You pick a year, the first time you open it, it's blank. You come down to the bottom and you do refresh from site. It will build the list of all of the sites. So in this case, 32,396. And now you'll have a list of sites with no statistics. And you should go and set the options that are most appropriate for what your agency is doing. If you calculate growth factors in Jackalope, and Jackalope growths your sites for you to create your site statistics, then you would select growth factor. If we don't do the growth factoring in Jackalope, you would set to do nothing. If you have multiple counts in a year, what do you want us to do with or about the multiple counts? So do nothing means we will not calculate a site AADT for any sites that have more than one count, whether that's a continuous station that also had a short-term taken sometime during the year, or multiple short-term counts were taken at a station for a year. It will just appear in the screen as an averaged count with no AADT, and leave the options to the operator to deal with, which we'll look at in a moment. Or average. You take a straight average of all of the count AADTs that are found for the year. Do we do the weighted average? Do we do these? I thought we removed these options somehow.
I'm not sure.
I was remembering it's a JIRA that it needs to be removed.
Okay.
I think we were doing the third one, but the fourth one, basically the idea behind the fourth one is you use continuous if it's there, but if it's not there, then you use a short-term weighted average. And I think we were removing that one.
Okay. I swear I saw it removed in some environment, and maybe it's just not in this deploy, which actually might make sense. But okay, so or else weighted average by duration. So then we would weight your continuous. So in the case of the continuous site where you also took a short term, if you wanted to use the average, we would weight your continuous higher because of the duration than the short term. Set your options. And then recompute all for your very first time of running phase 4 for this year. Again, in the job submitted screen, you're going to see it build the list. So you should see, if you have 32,000 sites in this screen here, you should eventually see 32,000 tasks created in that screen there. So it slowly builds the list of all of the tasks, and then it whittles away at calculating them. So you don't know that this is done until your job submitted says that they are all complete. You refresh the screen, And then you're looking at all of your site AADTs for that given year. As Joe mentioned in his earlier discussion, we copy an AADT. If it's one count, then we simply copy that AADT over, whether it's the continuous AADT that got calculated or the one count AADT that was taken for that site. We can have no AADT, and we'll tell you why. You hover here. We couldn't growth factor this site because we didn't have an AADT from the prior year. So there was nothing to apply a growth factor to. One of the other scenarios for that, and I don't know if we'll find one on this screen. Okay, so in this case, there was no growth factor to apply to this site. Either this site isn't a member of a factor group, or the factor group that it's a member of doesn't have a growth factor for year. And let's find an averaged, okay, so then we have growth AADTs. So it will show you, when this site was not counted, this had a growth factor applied to it. I don't see any on this very screen, so I'm gonna look for all of my, and this is how I do it when I'm running annual for anyone. I go and look for all the averaged AADTs and have it bring them to my screen. So we don't have a ton. Here are a couple of, handful of sites, and in each case we show how many counts were in the year and how many counts were excluded to calculate this AADT. What do I mean by that? Double click, and it shows that this site had a count taken in on May 1st, and this was the AADT. Hopefully it's not too small. It's pretty small even on my screen. And then there was a count taken in August, and this was its AADT. And then these two AADTs were averaged to generate the AADT we saw on the screen, which is right here. In this case, we had two counts, one in July and one in June, and the operator looked at it and said this second count, well, this earliest count in June was not a valid or an AADT I want to average. Uncheck the one you do not want to use, calculate and exit, and now you have a new AADT created, two counts, but only one was used to calculate this value. So a lot of effort needs to be made in the case of phase 4 for averaged counts, that operators should go in and verify and validate that if there are multiple counts, which ones they want to use and exclude any that are outliers, or maybe the reason you have multiple counts is because you had it recounted. The new count came in and it was a correct AADT, but the other account didn't get purged, maybe in that case, or you may keep both around, but you don't want to use them both to calculate the AADT. And I doubt we have any here, but so in the case of a count where it couldn't get growth factored, or any count with no AADT, this might take a moment for it to repopulate. I think Joe also mentioned we have the ability to plug. I'm going to quickly finish up here, Joe, because I know you have at least a few screens of even more complicated annual things to show. I'll let it refresh, but I believe if I double click on a site, no, how do we do the plug? I forget. Checkbox, plug, and it will let me, oh, okay, so you don't checkbox. So we do this once a year. It's easy to forget. You can pick the site that you want to plug the AADT for, type in your site name, fill in, is there? Give it a new AADT. If you want to do a positive and a negative, maybe split it in two, update it with that value in this screen. Now it would show up with a blue plugged, and this would not say no AADT, it would be a plugged AADT. I don't think I've covered everything I wanted to say, and again, like all of our other screens, if a site generated an AADT after you had run this, if you do the refresh from site, you can bring the site into the screen and checkbox and recompute that one site only. In the case of these, like say we had the average AADT and you actually go and purge a count because this brought to your attention that one of those multiple counts was bad, you purge that first count, you can checkbox that site and you can recompute only that site. It'll go out, find that it only has one good count anymore. It'll recopy the AADT. It will no longer say that it's an averaged AADT. It's now a copied AADT with the new value. Okay, any questions on phase 4? What was new that maybe you hadn't seen before was the averaged ability to do your keeping and removing of various count AADTs. All right, Joe, you can take over.
Okay, very cool. One second. Cool. All right. So actually it sounds like we still got a long ways to go, but really we don't. Kathy did all the hard work. So Kathy brought us to phase 4, the site statistic creation, which is where you go and do all what you just saw. I'm going to show you 4.5, which is the potential Meyer sort of interface for computing ADTs, where you have a very sparse data set for roads where there's just not a lot of data at all. 4.7 doesn't actually have an interface. It doesn't exist yet. Eventually it'll have an interface, but there's nothing to show yet. And phase 5 I showed you before, and phase 6 also doesn't really have an interface. It's state-specific code that gets written. Eventually, with the roads and highways one, there probably will be an interface. But for now, what that means is we have one interface to cover, which is the local roads UI, which is here. All right, I'm going to show you in Kansas. This was originally written for Kansas, but it has a possible use for any state. I think Wyoming has since picked up and started using it. It's here.
Yeah, so Chad contacted me and said he had seen it at our user group demo and they were interested, and so we worked with them on what they needed to provide us to set it up, and now they use it.
Yeah. And setup, there is some setup required. I'll explain a little bit later, but you know, you have to have cities defined and you have to have sites associated with cities and things like that. So there's a little bit of upfront setup, but once that's done, this same interface should work for anybody. See, I'm seeing there's a comment. Steven says, I can share the Meyer local ADT report with anyone who wants it to help improve local ADT values. Yeah, that would be good. I'd like to see that. Melissa would like to see it, for sure. Okay, and I'm not sure, Bill, if this was even written. Well, this was written. You had an interface that did this prior to any Meyer stuff. I think you know, the Meyer was just a serendipitous sort of, oh, we've already got something for that. Missouri would like to see it.
For fuel tax dispersal.
Fuel tax dispersal. Okay, yeah, that makes sense. So here's the interface. I'm not gonna mess too much with any of these things, but basically the idea is you've gone through your annual phases. You just did what Kathy just showed you, which is you create all your site statistics, and now what we're gonna do is we're gonna try to compute these various. We're gonna try to slice and dice all of our traffic data into ways that give us averages that are useful when you don't have any other data. So when you first run this, you would pick your year and you'd hit this green button and it would go off and do a whole bunch of things. It would sit there and average cities and average counties, and I'm just going to show you what it looks like here. Let's click on the corporate local road average first. What this does is it comes up with a matrix of essentially AADTs by population group and district. And then a statewide average on the right. So if you knew that you needed a value for District 1 for a city that had a population of 3,000, and you just had to have a number, here's a number to give them, 828. And you can see that all throughout here. You can double click on any particular cell and see how that data was calculated. This one's not too exciting, but there's one city in this population group in District 1, Hiawatha, that has a ADT of 828. In addition, you get some other information about the data in each of all of these cities, which there's one. You can get the average ADT, the mode, and then I don't remember what these are, Bill. What those two right there, or I'm not sure what those are. Do you know what those are, Bill? Help, Bill.
Yeah, it should be the minimum, maximum, average, and mode probably.
Okay, yes, I see. The low, high, average mode. Yes, thank you. Those labels are off.
Titles are in the wrong place.
Yeah.
That's what it is. Okay, and then you click on the city and you can view the counts in that city. And here we have, it looks like there are 4 counts total that have been taken in this city. You get the raw count and the adjusted count, of course, been factored, hopefully. You can go through here at an annual level and remove these if you don't like a particular count, if it's atypical of what you think that city might look like. You can go through and then remove those counts from the averages, in which case these values would change. Or you can just in one fell swoop say, I want to get rid of any counts that that are higher than 1,500. If there are a whole bunch of counts here and you didn't like anything over 1,500, you could remove them all in one fell swoop here. So, and again, the average mode, the low, and then the high, just to give you an idea of the variability of the counts in your city. I see a comment. Oh, Lord said yes. Okay. Okay, so this is one way to look at your data. In this case, we're looking at the data by district and population group, and you can click on any of these. Here's another one. I click District 4, and here are the various population groups, and you can see there are different cities in each of these. So for the 5,000 plus, we've got Fort Scott and Independence, and again, we can click on that to see the actual counts and exclude or include them from your totals. You can also look at them in 2 other ways. The rural local road average shows things by county. So again, you'd have to have all your sites associated with counties. And then you can see, okay, well, for Bourbon County, we have an ADT of 590. You can, again, double click just like you could before to see all the counts in Bourbon County and see their distribution. And of course, there's just one, so that's what it is. Again, you can remove counts from consideration by clicking this, and then that would change. And then urban local road averages gives it by city. So these are the various cities that qualify as urban locals. And so for Derby City, there's an ADT of 618. We can double click on that and see there's actually quite a few counts there. 14 counts in Derby City. You could go through and exclude them or not from consideration. And to get an estimate of ADTs in that city. So the general, with regards to Meyer, this would just be, it's a way of coming up with a number, and this all, Christy's question of how accurate do these ADTs need to be, and this is, if you just don't have any data, how accurate can you be? And this is a good way to get a number. It's documented. It's a process. It's something that we'll come up with the same number every time. So this is one way of fulfilling that requirement, I think. But again, we'll have to see what the accuracy requirements are.
So Joe, those are reports in the sense that then when you click on it, you would then be able to export it into the bottom,
You
like
can
the
definitely
PDF.
click them here. I think reports may be slightly a misnomer. It's more of a, an interactive way of looking at the data and, managing the counts that represent each of these entities, like managing the ones in, there's a Minneapolis, Kansas. Wow, managing the counts that are representing that city. I guess it's also a report in that it is a visual way of seeing the data, but
You could provide that to someone, yeah.
Yeah, you could, and yeah, and you can always export this. If someone wanted to know what the city's ADTs would be, yes, you could export this to Excel. Okay. Any questions on this? If you do want to implement this, it requires that your sites are associated with cities, which means we have to set up your city table, and then hopefully you've got a spreadsheet somewhere that tells you how sites relate to cities, and they have to be related to counties, and I think counties are related to districts, so if we relate them to counties, we're probably okay. And then you could use this interface at that point. I think, so I'm trying to remember here, the city, when you do the cities, it does require, you have to give the population of the city so you know what population group it falls into. So this is all information we could load for you if there's a source somewhere. But there are 571 cities in Kansas that are represented here, so it wouldn't be something you'd want to just do. You'd want to type in this way.
Joe, does the wording local and urban and rural refer then to the functional class and urban rural of the site?
Is that true, Bill?
Yes, that's right. This is just for functional class locals.
Okay. 7 U's and R's, and this would be the U and R differentiation, is the urban flag. Any other questions?
Yeah, I don't see any for annual, if truly no one has any more. Phase 1 through 6 questions. Okay.
Doesn't look like it. Stephen says I also included the 6 pilot studies, one of which was Minnesota DOT. Okay.
He's busy getting stuff for us. So I wanted to just call to everyone's attention that there is a report in Jackalope. I just pulled this off our test site here just to quickly show it. That is the HPMS class summary table. We have it in two flavors. One includes continuous only, and one that includes continuous and short-term for your class sites. The only thing I want to call to people's attention who are using this is, in the bottom, we've now put a disclaimer to make sure to mention to you, if you're providing that to HPMS coordinators as it is, then someone needs to go through the effort of doing the VMT weighting. That is not in Jackalope, so wanting to make sure that this isn't being turned over as it is and reported as it comes out of there without having that VMT weighting done.
Unless you're one of our cool section people.
But I don't think,
For the summary tables?
well, for this report, I don't, for this canned report, I don't believe, and I don't.
Okay, you're probably right, yeah. Yeah, we may need to have another
Right,
version.
but
where-
I do, she is right, it does not have VMT weighted, but I did do a report for one of our client to mess with VMT stuff, so it's easy to add.
Okay.
So.
Very good.
Okay, any questions on this comment? No. Next thing I wanted to say is that Cindy wrote a report that will be in the next version. It is the metadata report. Here's an example of one. I don't even know where I got this. I just had it from testing. So I honestly don't know what environment it had come from. I know it was working in our Minnesota test environment, but now we've overwritten that with a new database, and so I didn't have access to running that any longer. The caveat to being able to run this HPMS metadata report that I wanted to notify you about is you do need to have, if you're going to report state-owned versus not state-owned in this report, we needed to add a field in your site metadata that is state-owned yes or no. And then you, the client, need to tell us how we can populate that field for you based on maybe a rule that you know of, or you provide us a list of sites that are state-owned, and then we flip it to yes for those sites and no for all of the rest. But the two that we've done this setup for so far that I recall, I don't know if we did this for Delaware, but we did it for Nevada and Minnesota just recently. Minnesota,
Well,
setting up this,
right now, Delaware is all, they have all yeses.
all yeses.
Yeah, so we didn't set it up because they have all
They don't
yeses.
have, yeah. So if someone runs it now, they're all yeses because we don't, they could still run the report, but we can only say yes because we don't know any different. Is that true? Or do we know, Cindy?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I think it might be null. It might just be a blank. There's not a yes or a no on that.
Gotcha. Christy, you had asked if I could present this. I don't know if that was what you were getting at or satisfies your question, but
I think so. I had never seen one, and I will admit to have not been updating our metadata in a while because I did not have a good way to do it. So I'm excited to be able to update our metadata next year.
Yep. Nicholas had a question. Can I do that with smart site groups for state and non-state owned? I'm not sure what you mean. Can you do what? Can you do the update?
Well, no, we have to have the custom value has to, the way I wrote the report, we have to have that custom value either yes or no. So it can't, where you have the site groups, the easiest way is for us to tell. You could say site groups in this group are all yes, and then I would go through and find those site IDs and then change the custom value and assign it that way. So we could do it in the assigning of those the custom value. But other than that, having the site groups, you know.
Okay, so he said he thinks that's what he meant. So I was just going to quickly show what it looked like in Nevada. So here's a site. I double clicked, and then it's one of these state owned, and it's null if we don't know. It's a yes or a no if we do.
Yeah.
Okay, so Nicholas is saying, could he use that to help identify what is and isn't?
So if you have a site group that is state-owned site group or is not state-owned site group, then yes, I could take that rule and then from that rule do the assignment.
So Christy, I'm scrolling through down here to the different. Okay, Nicholas, I saw that. So Christy, we'll be upgrading your database after the user conference is over to being on your, well, just at a current version, and I'll let you know when this is available on there, and then you can run it on your, your own data.
Good.
And I want to clarify that this is not everything in the metadata file that they ask for. It's only the information that we have in Jackalope.
Right, right.
Okay.
The things that change, yeah. Like there's questions on, are you seasonally adjusting your data or something like that. We didn't bother to include that in the report because that's something that should never change.
Right.
Nicholas is asking, I just created it as a PDF because that's just what I'm used to doing.
It actually comes as a CVS delimited file.
CSV.
The report and no header, no like agency header, anything. It's designed so that you would do it as a CVS and then have it and plug it into your metadata file that you have there already that has everything else.
Yeah, that's what it looked like. Yeah.
Yeah. And I didn't even include the state code on it. I just simple, cut and paste kind of thing.
I don't even know where I ran this. Okay, you're welcome. Any other comments or questions on any of this phase, annual phases stuff that we covered? We are 17 minutes early.
All right. Well, no one's probably going to complain.
Yeah.
So tomorrow, same time. So